Hello, you're watching Scotland at 7. So thanks for tuning into Broadcasting Scotland tonight. I'm Hugh Stewart and I'm going to give you a roundup of today's news. We have a number of top stories from the UK today, but first I'm going to begin with the Ukraine roundup. This takes us to day 134 of Russia's illegal invasion of their neighbour. First story, Western weapons work. A top Ukrainian official said today that high-precision weapons do help to slow down the Russian invaders' advance, but time is needed to train soldiers to use them, and that more of this equipment is needed. Using tech such as high-mobility artillery rocket systems, Ukrainian defences have been able to destroy Russian warehouses and command posts. These systems also helped to force occupying troops out of Snake Island this week. According to Oleg Danilov of Ukraine's National Security and Defence Council, what the Russians wanted to do in 3 days, they now do in 1.5 weeks. Russia warns Lithuania. Russia has today threatened what they call harsh measures against Lithuania and the whole European Union if they continue to block the transit of certain goods to the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad on the Baltic. Unnamed measures will be taken if the situation does not stabilise in the coming days, according to Maria Zarakova, speaking for the Russian Foreign Ministry. Fake information in Russia gets you 7 years in jail, but what is fake information? Moscow District Councillor Alexei Gorinov has been jailed for 7 years for speaking out against Russia's war in Ukraine. Mr. Gorinov was arrested under new laws on what was called fake information, which can mean any comments deviating from the official line. Alexei Gorinov is a member of the Krasnoyelsky District Council, which is part of Greater Moscow, told a council meeting on the 15th of March, where a children's drawing contest was being discussed, that Russia was waging a war of aggression against Ukraine. He was at the council meeting on the 15th of March to discuss the children's drawing competition, and he was recorded on YouTube saying, "What kind of children's drawing contest can we talk about for Children's Day when we have children dying every day?" Gorinov's supporters posted a picture on the Telegram channel of the councillor handcuffed in the glass defendant's cage in court, holding up a placard reading, "Do you still need this war?" That was during the court proceedings. "They took away my spring, they took away my summer, and now they've taken away 7 more years of my life," they quoted as he was sentenced today, Friday. Putin warns the West on energy. Vladimir Putin warned of catastrophic consequences for global energy markets, with European nations most at risk if Western countries impose further sanctions on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. European countries are working on alternative sources to replace Russian oil and gas imports, a risk to the long-term stability of the sanctions-hit Russian economy, which has been bolstered by revenues from its commodity exports. But speaking with members of governments over a video link on Friday, Russia's president said it was European countries that faced the greatest risk, as their move away from Russian energy will lead to higher gas prices on the spot market for consumers. For the spot market and for consumers, he said. All this reveals once again that sanctions on Russia end up causing more harm to those countries that impose them, Mr. Putin said. The further use of sanctions could lead to even more severe consequences, even without exaggeration, catastrophic consequences on the global energy market. That was Vladimir Putin speaking today about the sanctions imposed by Europe. Disinformation comes up again in my final part of the Ukraine roundup today, because Canada has taken measures against Russian disinformation. To counter the Kremlin's disinformation campaign, Canada is imposing sanctions against 29 state-sponsored disinformation and propaganda agents, as they call it, and 15 entities controlled or owned by the Russian government and involved in disinformation efforts. This includes Sumatovich Gayasparian, who's the head of the International Department at Russia Today, RT, the state media company with considerable influence in Russia. These measures were today announced at the G20 summit, which is meeting in Bali, Indonesia. Canada has also launched a web page dedicated to countering disinformation with fact. Canada will continue to use this platform to shed light on how the Russian regime is using lies to justify its illegal, unprovoked and unjustified invasion of Ukraine. Melanie Joly, who's the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Canada, said, "The Russian propaganda machine must answer for its lies. Canada is committed to fighting disinformation wherever and whenever it is found. Today we make it clear that those who peddle deception, you will be held accountable. Canada stands with Ukraine." That was the Foreign Minister for Canada. Now, on today's main news, I'm going to begin with the tragic news this morning of the shooting of Shinzo Abe, the former Japanese Prime Minister. Shinzo Abe, who was the longest-serving Japanese leader, has died today, hours after he was shot while campaigning for a parliamentary election, shocking a country in which political violence is rare and guns are tightly controlled. A man opened fire on Mr. Abe, who was 67, from behind with an apparently homemade gun as he spoke at a traffic island in the western city of Nara, according to Japanese media today. This was the first assassination of a sitting or former Japanese premier since the days of pre-war militarism in the 1930s. The hospital that tried to save Mr. Abe said he died at 5:03 p.m. Japanese time, which is 8:03 GMT, about 5.5 hours after being shot. A doctor said that Mr. Abe had bled to death from two deep wounds. One was on the right side of his neck. He had no vital signs when he was brought in. Speaking before Mr. Abe's death was announced, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said that the shooting was to be condemned in the strongest terms, while the Japanese people and world leaders expressed shock. Police said a 41-year-old man suspected of carrying out the shooting had been arrested. NHK media quoted the suspect as Tetsuna Yamagami. Japanese media reported that Yamagami told the police he was dissatisfied with the former Prime Minister and had targeted Abe with the intention of killing him. Officials and police gave no further details about a possible motive. It was reported that the man did not try to escape. Police said that the suspected shooter was a resident of Nara. Media said he had served in Japan's military for 3 years until 2005. Defence Minister Kishi declined to comment on that. He's been questioned at the Naranishi police station, and NHK media reported that possible explosives were found at his home. He's believed to have fashioned the gun himself. So that was a bizarre shooting of a former Japanese Prime Minister this morning, our time. Let's look at gun crime in Japan. How common is it, or how rare? Last year, there were just 10 instances of shooting in the island nation of more than 125 million people, according to the National Police Agency. A major factor behind this is the country's extremely strict gun control laws. Handguns are outlawed, and the only guns permitted for sale are shotguns and air rifles, which require strenuous effort and lots of patience to get a license, according to CNN. To buy a gun in Japan, potential buyers must attend an all-day class, pass a written exam, and a shooting range test and achieve an accuracy of at least 95%, adding CNN, the US news site. On top of this, they must undergo extensive mental health, drug and background checks, the latter including a review of their criminal record, their personal debt, involvement in organised crime, and relations with family and friends. The result is that the level of gun ownership among Japanese civilians is among the lowest in the world. According to Bloomberg and gunpolicy.org, the estimated total number of guns held by civilians in Japan was 310,000, which is 0.25%, a quarter per 100 people. Quarter of a percent per 100 people. And that's the lowest level among the G7 countries. By way of comparison, the number of guns held by civilians in America that same year was 393 million, which is 120 guns per 100. In the UK, it was 3.2 million guns, which is 5 per 100 people. So I'll just go over those numbers again. So starting with the UK, approximately 5 people out of every 100 owns a legal gun, whereas in America it's 120 out of every 100, and in Japan it's a quarter of a percent. Hardly any. Okay, by way of comparison, sorry, I did that. Political violence does not happen very often in Japan. However, it is extremely rare, Injiro Anasuma, who was the then head of the Japanese Socialist Party, was murdered in 1960. There was an assassination attempt against the former Prime Minister Hosokawa in 1994, and the mayor of Nagasaki was shot by an alleged gangster in 2007. The infrequency of these incidents is a measure of just how rare and shocking gun violence is in that country, where gun ownership is strictly controlled, according to Bloomberg. Although Mr. Abe did have a team of security police with him today, it appears that the shooter was able to get within a few metres of him without any sort of check, according to Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reporting for the BBC. The shooting of such a prominent figure is profoundly shocking in a country which prides itself on being so safe. Okay, turning to UK news. Top Tories resist moves to speed up the replacement of Boris Johnson. Did he resign or did he not? Senior Conservatives, including the new Education Secretary, that's the English Education Secretary, are resisting pressure to speed up moves to replace Boris Johnson as party leader, insisting there should be a full contest involving members. James Cleverly, who took charge of the Education Department in England on Thursday, also said that Mr Johnson had not put a timeline on how long he would remain in Downing Street after apparently quitting as leader of the Tory party. He rejected the former Prime Minister John Major's call to expedite the appointment of a new leader by cutting out the final vote by Conservative Party members across the country. On Monday, the elections will take place to the executive of the Conservative Backbench 1922 committee, which will then set out the rules and the timetable for the leadership contest. Under the current rules, MPs only will vote in a series of secret ballots, depending on how many candidates there are, and only the final two go on to a vote for the full membership of the Conservative Party. Mr Cleverly's position was echoed this morning by Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, Treasurer of the 22 Committee, who told Radio 4's Today programme that the vote for the next Prime Minister was likely to go out to the party membership. Under these circumstances, he said, with the division in the party, I think it's a good thing that it goes to the membership so they have the opportunity to have their say and to have a vote. Cleverly also said that Mr Johnson would not take any decisions which bind the hands of his successor while he remains at number 10. We should remember that it's quite likely at the moment then that Mr Johnson, although as I said he's apparently resigned, will probably still be in number 10 in October unless anything changes. Mr Cleverly's remarks are in stark contrast to those of George Freeman, one of the last ministers to quit before Johnson made his announcement. Mr Freeman said the tone of the Prime Minister's address at Downing Street this week did not suggest that he would see his time out with quiet humility and contrition, adding that his real worry is that instability will fuel a febrile moment of midsummer madness where we choose the wrong person in a hurry because of the instability. However, the energy surrounding the pressure from the Tories for Johnson to step down this week in order to make way for a caretaker Prime Minister appeared to be fading. Caroline Noakes, a former minister who has been one of Johnson's most consistent critics, told the Today programme it was important to focus on the future, uniting the Conservative Party and getting the economy going again. The leadership contest should be got over and done with in the next few weeks, she said. Another former Tory minister, Andrew Mitchell, has said that the next leader of the party needs to be somebody who's patently moral and who is uncontaminated by Johnson's mistakes. Okay, so it remains to be seen if the Prime Minister is indeed going to remain on for several months after apparently resigning. Another UK story now. Let's look. Before we move on to petrol and diesel prices, we just looked up, just a short while ago actually, I've looked up an opinion poll out today, which is not good news for the Conservatives. Well, when he made his apparent resignation speech a few days ago, the Prime Minister Johnson claimed that Conservatives were just a few points behind Labour in the polls, and that was actually quite good halfway through a parliamentary term when the sitting government usually drifts in the polls. But Mr Johnson said that the drift was not all that great. Now, that would be true if the figures actually bore it out, but they don't. A Survation poll out today suggests that Mr Johnson is wrong. UK-wide, this means that UK-wide 40% of those sampled said that they would back Keir Starmer's party, while only 29% said they would back Mr Johnson. Personally, Mr Johnson is now only backed by 20% of those polled who think he makes a good Prime Minister. The SNP's vote remains steady at 5%. That means over UK level, but when it looks at Scotland, that means the SNP is still in a very dominant position. In fact, that 5%, when focused on Scotland, means that most Conservative MPs would in fact lose their seats if we went into a general election on these polling figures. There only are, of course, 6 Conservatives in Scotland, and almost all of them would lose their seats. So that certainly includes Alistair Jack, the Scottish Secretary, and Douglas Ross, Conservative leader in Scotland. So they're both tipped to lose their seats if the opinion polls continue at this level. Interestingly, Labour on these figures would regain Gordon Brown's old seat of Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath, which is currently held by Neil Hanvey of Alba. UK-wide, the Tories are heading for a wipeout, even worse than Jeremy Corbyn's defeat to Johnson in 2019. Okay, so that's maybe another element that Conservatives might be considering when you look at whether to replace Prime Minister Johnson early and put in a caretaker. Okay, now back to our next story. I was going to talk about inflation and increasing prices for petrol and diesel. The UK's competition watchdog will launch an in-depth investigation into the fuel sector after raising concerns over the margins made by refineries amid sky-high fuel prices on the forecourts across the country. In an urgent review commissioned by the government and published today, the Competition and Markets Authority, that's the CMA, has said it has found cause for concern in the growing gap between the price of crude oil when it enters refineries and the wholesale price when it leaves refineries in the form of petrol or diesel. The watchdog, the CMA, said that the main drivers of the increased road fuel prices were the rising cost of crude oil, plus the growing gap between the crude oil price and the wholesale price of petrol and diesel. This is known as the refining spread. It said the refining spread had tripled in size last year, growing from 10p to almost 35p a litre. Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng last month asked the competition watchdog to carry out a short and focused review into the fuel sector amid claims that petrol retailers were profiteering. The CMA will now begin a deeper investigation into the fuel sector with an interim report due out in the autumn. It includes plans to look at whether the disparities in price between urban and rural areas are justified. Retailers had been accused of not passing on the 5p cut to fuel duty announced by the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak in his spring statement last March. However, the CMA review found that on the whole, the fuel duty cut does appear to have been implemented, with the largest fuel retailers doing so immediately and the others more gradually. Fuel prices have hit record highs in recent weeks. The RAC said that the average cost of a litre of petrol rose 16.59p in June, breaking the previous 11p record rise in a single month, which was March. Petrol now costs typically £1.91 and 0.27 pence, and diesel at 198.84 on average, according to the RAC. That puts the cost of a typical 55-litre tank of petrol at £105, while the same volume of diesel costs £109. This week, drivers staged protests over high prices on various highways, air roads and motorways. Sarah Cardell, the CMA's General Counsel, said, "The recent rise in public pump prices are a major worry for millions of drivers. While there's no escaping the global pressures pushing up fuel prices, the growing gap between the oil price and the wholesale price of petrol and diesel is a cause for concern. We now need to get to the bottom of whether there are legitimate reasons for this, and if not, what action can be taken to address it." Okay, so I'll shortly, after a glass of water, look at two stories of two economies. We're going to look at some new figures out on the economy of Ireland, and then we're going to contrast that with economic forecast for the UK. Excuse me. So first, Ireland. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, has said that Ireland's economic outlook remains positive despite substantial uncertainty due to the war in Ukraine. The International Financial Institution has stated that while growth is expected to remain strong, Ireland was likely to face economic indirect effects from the war to rising inflation levels and a decline in global demand. In the report published following its annual review of the Irish economy, the IMF said that pre-pandemic challenges remain for Ireland's economy, including housing shortages, infrastructure, and a gap in green and social investment. The report detailed that growth was expected to slow from 13.5% last year to a still robust 7.5% this year. The IMF welcomed the support provided to customers to reduce the impact of rising energy prices on both households and businesses. It noted that the implementation of further measures should be aimed at supporting the most vulnerable. The financial institution said, that's the IMF, said that Ireland's economic recovery from pandemic was mainly driven by multinational enterprises investing in the economy. It also said the financial sector weathered the pandemic crisis well, thanks to high capital buffers and effective policy support. Okay, before we look at UK, let me just remind you then that the economic growth in Ireland is expected to be 7.5% this year. So let's look at the UK, the economic outlook for 2022. The British Chambers of Commerce have downgraded expectations for UK's GDP growth for this year to 3.5%. Well, that's only a bit down from 3.6% against a deteriorating economic outlook, and now expects UK inflation to reach 10% in the fourth quarter of this year, comfortably outpacing the growth in average earnings. The heightened economic uncertainty and rising costs are also expected to significantly weaken business investment, with only 1.8% growth in investment predicted for this year, and that's down sharply from the 3.5% growth in investment which was forecast previously. Consumers and businesses face unprecedented inflationary pressures flowing from rising raw material costs, the increase in the energy price gap, and upward pressure on energy and commodity prices. If the Consumer Price Index, that's the CPI inflation, does reach 10% in the fourth quarter of this year, it would be the highest since the CPI records began in their current form in 1989. Commenting on the forecast, Alex Veitch, who's the Director of Policy at the British Chambers of Commerce, said, "With inflation forecast to race ahead of wages, we are concerned about a dip in consumer spending, which would further impact businesses and hamper growth. We forecast that if trends continue, inflation will only return to the Bank of England's target rate at the end of 2024, implying a prolonged period of difficulty for the UK. Against this backdrop, the government must put in place stable and supportive policies that help businesses pull the UK out of this economic quagmire. Firms must be given confidence to invest. Only then can they drive the growth the economy so desperately needs." Okay, that was Alex Veitch, Director of Policy at the British Chambers of Commerce. And let me just summarise. So inflation is expected to reach 10% in Britain. Economic growth in Britain maybe 3.5%, which of course is bouncing back from COVID. But contrasting that to Ireland, their economic growth is going to be 7.5%. And just finally, can I remind you that inflation is supposed to be 2%. That's what Alex Veitch was talking about. The target rate, the Bank of England likes to keep inflation not above or not below 2%. So that it's not expected to go back to that level till 2024. Okay, let's move on to a story from Glasgow. Going back to last year's protests in Kenmure Street. 3 people are to stand trial following that mass demonstration which was held on Glasgow Street after 2 men were detained by Home Office officials. The 3 are Olivia Jones, who's 24, Karios Pablepa and Nicholas Sigsworth, who are both 33, and they face charges following the protest which took place in Kenmure Street, Pollokshields, in the south side of Glasgow on May 13th, 2021. Crowds had gathered that day after 2 Sikh men were detained by the Home Office for alleged immigration violations. Olivia Jones, who lives in Battlefield, Glasgow, is accused of behaving in a threatening and abusive manner towards the police. She's then charged with obstructing 2 constables by struggling with them and lying under a car. Jones faces the third charge of repeatedly kicking one of the officers to her injury and the final accusation of punching the other on the body. Papleka, who's from Muswell Hill, London, is also charged with acting in a threatening manner towards police and trying to lie under a vehicle as it was being removed. Sigsworth, who's from York, faces charges that he obstructed 3 constables and refused to get out of a vehicle, or an alternative allegation of breach of the peace. The cases against the 3 were called at separate hearings at the Glasgow Sheriff Court. Each 3 pled not guilty to the charges they face. Jones and Paklepa are due to face summary trials, that's without a jury, in early October, and Sigsworth's case will be set for later that month. The 3 remain on bail in the meantime. And another story from Glasgow courts today. Who is Nicholas Rossi? STV reports that a court has heard that fingerprints taken from a man facing extradition to the United States confirm that he is the convicted sex offender Nicholas Rossi. The man, who insists he is Arthur Knight and a victim of mistaken identity, was remanded in custody after pleading not guilty to threatening the staff at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow earlier this week. The 34-year-old appeared in court Thursday in a wheelchair and wearing an oxygen mask. Prosecutor Julie Clark, the fiscal, told Glasgow Sheriff Court that while in hospital on the 5th of July, the accused was screaming and cursing and getting up from his bed like a raging bull. As Clark, the procurator, said that a consultant was left trembling in fear and a doctor and nurse felt unable to come into work the next day because they were too shocked. Opposing bail, the procurator said the Crown say he is a serious risk of failing to appear at any hearing and is a substantial risk of reoffending and a substantial risk of obstructing the course of justice. He appears today as Arthur Knight, but has previously been identified by medical professionals and civilians as Nicholas Rossi. The accused was then heard shouting from the dock, "That's not true." Ms. Clark went on, he has at least 10 aliases and is also known in the US as Nicholas Rossi or as Ardverdian and speaks there in an American accent. He is known by his wife's family as Nicholas Brown, speaking in an Irish accent. He is recorded at the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital as Arthur Winston Brown, and identified himself on Tuesday as Arthur Knight, speaking in an English accent. Fingerprints taken when he was arrested for this matter earlier in the week were confirmed to be those of Nicholas Rossi. US prosecutors say Rossi, a convicted sex offender, faked his own death and fled the United States to escape a rape charge in Utah and allegations of fraud and sexual battery. Proceedings in Glasgow were briefly stopped on Thursday yesterday when the accused said his oxygen tank had run out. Ms. Clark, prosecuting, said the Crown have received a number of medical reports and state there is no concern related to his lungs. The description of seizures given by those who have witnessed him were thought to be fake. Defence lawyer Munawar Ali told the court his client is a first offender with no previous convictions that he had not attended to earlier extradition hearings in Edinburgh due to ill health. Mr. Ali added he is a suitable candidate for bail. He has a medical reason. We have no written record to say that he's faking anything. At one point, his client could be heard saying, "The medical records state that I have epilepsy. These are not fake seizures." Sheriff Gerald McMillan decided against bail, saying, "I think there is merit in what the Procurator Fiscal said. There is a possibility that you may abscond or fail to appear at a hearing. There's a substantial risk of that." Trial was scheduled for August, while another hearing to continue the US extradition request is due to take place at Edinburgh Sheriff Court on the 12th of July, 12th of this month. Scottish news now. Vulnerable households across Scotland could benefit from a £1 million fund designed to help those struggling amidst the cost of living crisis to help them meet soaring energy charges. An estimated 6,000 homes may be eligible to receive a portion of the Safe and Warm Advice Service pot as part of a new programme organised between the body in charge of Scotland's gas supply and the Citizens Advice Network. It's hoped that the tie-up can ensure more people are advised on how to use energy safely and efficiently in their homes to help reduce their energy bills. Details of how to protect homes from the dangers posed by carbon monoxide poisoning and what actions to take if residents fear they have symptoms. Energy advisors will be appointed to the citizens' advice facilities across central and southern Scotland to support vulnerable groups as well as hard-to-reach groups like asylum seekers, minority ethnic groups, travellers, park home communities and those who are digitally excluded. It's hoped that they can guide those struggling financially towards all benefits and grants they are entitled to. The regulator Ofgem initially raised the price cap for energy firms in April, but a second rise is expected in October amid rising inflation and pressure on global supplies. Derek Mitchell, the Chief Executive at Citizens Advice Scotland, said, "This is a terrific boost to our work providing energy-related advice. The SGN has supported our work over many years, and this is the latest manifestation of that. The new money will mean that CABs, the Citizens Advice Bureaus across Scotland, can employ additional advisors. The specific aims of this project are to reach vulnerable people, including those who are hard to reach. And that's a hugely important objective. The emphasis on carbon monoxide poisoning is also extremely important and hopefully will save lives." Now, another Scottish story here. Two Scottish stories to finish up with. First of all, Scotland's transition towards net zero. The public and those working in the energy sector have been invited to give their views on how Scotland can reach its net zero targets through the just transition. The Scottish Government will gather views on the route map for the draft energy strategy and the Just Transition Plan. That's the ESJTP. This plan is going to be published later this year. The ESJTP plan will set out changes the Government aims to make through the coming decade. Currently, Scotland has a target of 75% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. That's compared to 1990 levels. And a net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. The Just Transition Minister, Richard Lochhead, said, "Ensuring our journey to net zero is just and fair for everyone is critical. That's why the Scottish Government is planning a summer of engagement so that voices from those involved in the industry can be heard. Over the next generation, a just transition will mean good jobs and a thriving net zero and a climate-resilient economy. It offers the possibility to improve the way we live at home, as well as expanding the possibilities for exporting our products and expertise around the globe." He continued, "We recognise the significant contribution that workers in the oil and gas sector have made to the prosperity of Scotland. We recognise the significant contribution that workers in the oil and gas sector have made to prosperity, and we do not want to lose this wealth of experience. That's why we're investing £500 million in the Just Transition Fund to support the North East of Scotland as one of Scotland's centres of excellence in the transition towards a net zero economy by 2025. Now, very quickly, the final story we have today is on the, let me see where did I put it, it's just come in. The First Minister is on her way, or might now be in Guernsey, for this weekend's meeting of the British Irish Council. This is the body which meets not too often and which doesn't usually have the Prime Minister at it. The Prime Minister, of course, the outgoing Prime Minister, if he ever goes, said that he was Minister for the Union. No, I don't think he was a regular attendee at the British Irish Council. So the First Minister will be there over the weekend. I think she has arrived now, actually, because I can see a picture of her. And Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister of Scotland, has said that Scotland will remain a member of the British Irish Council should Scotland vote for independence. So that forum will still continue as a way of the four nations, keeping discussions going at government level. Okay, so that's Nicola Sturgeon at the British Islands Council in Guernsey over the weekend. And that's it from me tonight. So thank you for watching Scotland at 7. If you haven't seen us before, at Broadcasting Scotland, we're doing Scotland at 7, 5 nights a week, Monday to Friday. We do this usually a 1-hour broadcast. I'm stopping now because we don't have a guest on tonight. But where guests are available, we can usually go into more in-depth discussions. So it's usually a 1-hour programme. The other show we put out is Sunday lunchtime, the full Scottish we call that, and that's a bit of a longer discussion on 4 or 5 of the big topics which have come up this week. Now this Sunday we have a special. We're going to be looking at the massacre and attempted genocide at Srebrenica, and we have reporters on the spot. So we have a special coming up on Scotland, the full Scottish this Sunday lunchtime. That goes out at 12 o'clock, but also available afterwards if you're doing something else at that time. Okay, so thanks for watching either now or maybe catching up with me later on YouTube. And it'd be great if you'd support us if you want us to increase the number of programmes. The first way you can do that, of course, is to look at the website, which is on the screen below. And if you sign up for just even a £5 a month direct debit, along with the hundreds of others who have done that, then you are the people who are actually keeping Broadcasting Scotland going. So thank you to our supporters, and we really do recognise the contribution you make. So that's our only source of income at the moment. So please, if you can manage a wee direct debit, that'll help. The other thing you can do, of course, is to pass us on in social media. And if you would like to help join our team of volunteers, why not get in touch? The broadcaster is actually a studio-based TV station, although as you can see I'm not in the studio tonight, I'm actually in my cabin in the garden, but we have a studio in Glasgow in the centre of the city where the team right now is producing this programme. We also have outside broadcast facilities, so wherever you are in Scotland or even further of Scotland, you can take part. There are jobs for you to do, so please get in touch. Doesn't matter where you are, we have the technology, and as you will see on the Sunday's programme, our technology is not limited by miles. Okay, I better shut up and let you get your tea. Okay, so thanks for watching Scotland Sim tonight. I'm Hugh Stewart. I'll be back this Sunday at lunchtime. See you later. Bye.